This is Hammett.
And Jessica.
And you're listening to the Friendly Atheist Podcast. Please go to patreon.com/friendlyatheist podcast to support this show. Get your ad-free episodes and bonus episodes. Hello.
Hi.
We have much to discuss.
Oh, yeah?
Yes. Do you want me to get started?
I suppose.
Okay.
Unless you want me to talk about my terrible week.
I do. We'll save it for the bonus.
Great.
Okay, so this is one where it's a weird story because I don't even know how I want to say this, but
Oh, boy.
my favorite thing about writing about atheism stuff is I will get tips from people who are like, here's a story that's undercovered. Maybe you want to dig into this. Love those emails because I do dig into every single one of
You're
them.
a capital J journalist.
Oh, sure, right. But so I get this email about a very underreported, like only one outlet published anything about it.
Oh.
And here's the gist of it. I'm going to try really hard not to give identifying information because I'm not trying to make this person's life worse, right? So the story suggested this person, one, did something shady as hell. Mm-hmm. This person is an atheist. That's why it was sent to me. Did something shady as hell. Tried changing their name, presumably to avoid getting caught doing something shady as hell.
Oh, boy.
And number 3 was running for elected office, which is why it was relevant.
Fun twister.
So all of those things, I'm like, yes, I am very intrigued by this. I would like to dig into this even more.
You do love a low-level political atheist, don't you?
Oh, it's fantastic. I live for it.
School boards, city councils.
You know, the races that are not getting big attention, I'm like, yeah, you bring it on.
Yeah.
So that means, okay, I get this information. I'm like, okay, what do I need to know about this? What do we know about these allegations? Some of this stuff was mentioned in the thing that was sent to me. But I'm like, all right, what else can we know about this? So I start doing the digging into this. And the way I usually write these things is I'm like, okay, this is the information I have. Let me start working on my own version of this article.
Sure.
And figure out what gaps do I need to fill? Who should I talk to if I need to reach out to anybody?
You're sort of building a narrative that you're going to fill in.
And then if the narrative turns out to be wrong, cool, I'll mention that too, because I'm not pre-writing the conclusion. I'm trying to get the lay of the land, right? So the first thing is, what do we know about these allegations? And it turns out there were no criminal charges filed.
Okay.
It was kind of a he said, she said story, which doesn't mean it's not important, but there's no charges here. The person denied everything and presumably said there's a reasonable explanation for this. It just, you can make it look bad.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, an allegation, still an allegation, but there's no paperwork confirming that this was made or anything because there's no police report. There's nothing like that.
This is
Doesn't
the
mean nothing
vaguest
happened.
story you've ever told.
It is. I know. Then the second thing is
he
about...
did a thing, or did he?
I know. The name change thing turned out to be legit. This person's changing their name. So I'm like, okay, I will jot that down and I'm going to look into that because why is this person trying to avoid what's going on here?
Or are those two unconnected things?
Yeah. So anyway.
Yep.
And the last part is this person running for an office? And the answer turned out to be yes. And so then I start asking around because I know people in the bubble of this person. So I'm like, hey, what can you tell me about this situation? And I do get some people who are going to talk to me about it. And I also reach out to the person himself. And I'm like, listen, this looks pretty bad. You want to explain any of this shit? I'm not expecting to get a response.
Sure.
Also, those are how my emails go.
Yeah. I've gotten them.
And so everything was all set. I had an article ready to go based on everything I had. I thought it was going to be a good article because it's
interesting.
It is interesting.
Underreported. And,
yes.
Yeah.
With all due credit to the original person who started writing about it. And then I did hear back from the person himself. And I mean, in terms of the part 1, which was the allegation, is the same story I already knew, which is he denies it. And also it never escalated to anything because there was nothing to base it off of. By the way, when I say there was an allegation, it was not of a sexual kind. It was, this person made me feel really uncomfortable.
Ew. Okay.
But he didn't pressure anything. He didn't do anything like that.
Are we in the first episode of a 10-episode Netflix
No.
miniseries that we're going to see everything shake out?
It's a 5-minute teaser that's going to end soon.
Got you.
In terms of the name changes,
Yep.
he told me what that was about, and the explanation made sense. And I'm like,
People have reasons for changing their names beyond escaping things.
It wasn't, I could make an argument for why, you're not trying to avoid anything.
Mm-hmm.
This is what happened. I'm like, okay, I mean, that actually makes some sense.
Okay.
And then he said, oh, and by the way, there is a lot of distraction about this stuff. I'm not going to be running for anything.
Oh.
And at that point, I'm like, well,
what am I doing? Now
Well,
I'm just harassing a random person.
Yeah. And even if the allegation was legit and you made someone uncomfortable, that's not something that needs to be like
elevated
to whatever attention
Your
I would put
platform,
on it. So at that point, I'm like, well, shit, I have a story. And you know what? And then I was like, I'm going to delete the story. There's nothing for me to do here, which is the responsible thing to do, I think. And also,
but
you know what? Damn it,
you
I spent time on this.
Yeah, you wasted your time.
And it was going to be juicy. But
we freelancers need to be very mindful of our time.
that was the highlight / damn it of the week for me. Where I'm like,
so glad we kicked off our show with a story that you didn't write.
I figured, you know what? Because it's a story I didn't end up writing. This is what I try to do.
Oh, sure.
Whenever there's some tip like that, like I'm not running it on a whim.
Are you bragging about being a responsible journalist? Is that what we're doing here?
I wouldn't say journalist. I think it is the skepticism.
Sure.
And you know what? This is the allegation. There is a reporter, by the way, not a rando, not some right-wing conspiracy theorist, but like a legit person who was writing the initial story I saw, and I'm like, okay, I get what he's saying. I should look into this a little more. Yep. And because it involves an atheist and because it involves running for office,
sure,
I can reach out to people about this because that's what I would do in any other case too. And it turned out, when I got more information, there was no story there worth elevating. And that's it. This is not a humble brag. This is more of a, I would hope more people would do something like that because not everything needs to be a story. And by the way, in a lot of conservative outlets, they don't do any of that shit.
Sure.
And I wish more people would. That's it.
Wow.
Anyway,
all right.
Let's talk about people who deserve
it.
I am, right? No. Let's talk about people who deserve it.
I am sarcastic, but yeah, good for you.
Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Hey!
Just had... And we're done. This is a story that doesn't involve
it's like
Ryan
a
Walters.
Ghost that happened to me.
I'm very happy.
Ryan Walters
doesn't involve him.
Last week I realized he's kind of hot, and that made me unhappy.
Oh.
No, totally. It's a smoke show. He's an idiot.
Oh my God.
I know. I'm disappointed
Stop
too.
It.
Listen, nobody's more disappointed than me, Hammett.
Stop it. So, you just see his picture or something for the first time?
Yeah, do you think I do any supplemental research? I don't even follow the news on my Facebook because my brain can't handle it anymore.
You're not even listening to me right now.
No, truly. I'm almost always petting the dog.
Okay, so in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which again, biggest city, I assume, in Oklahoma.
Now who's doing the research? It's the Paris of Oklahoma.
Because it's a big city in a red state, you imagine it's a bluer place, a blue island in a red state. But how blue is that island? For the past 18 years, they've had a Republican mayor.
Yeah.
Maybe not an extremist Republican mayor, but a Republican mayor. So they had their mayoral election this week. And we had talked about this about a month ago, that the Republican candidate in that race was this guy named Brent Van Norman. And the reason we talked about him about a month ago is because he spoke during a church service at the church of a Christian nationalist and former U.S. Senate candidate, Jackson Laymeyer.
Oh, boy.
And Brent Van Norman showed up at this church. He was on stage with Laymeyer. And one of the things that he was given the mic, and you could talk to our congregation.
Sure.
What do you want to say to them?
But there's no cord in that mic, so you can really walk around.
Yeah.
Fill some space.
Van Norman said, my number one qualification for being mayor of Tulsa is that I am an unashamed follower of Jesus.
Wow. He must be the only Oklahoman who has that qualification.
Yeah, and then he said the thing that was even more disturbing. He said, I think that if you go back and study the history of our nation and our founding, ... public officials had to be Christians in many areas, and we've gone so far away from that, and we need to get back.
Boy, they really just said the quiet part out loud. All over they've given up on subtlety.
It's a weird way of saying, no Jews in public office,
it really
no atheists,
is.
no Muslims.
Boy, this is...
He said that
Boy.
in front of the church crowd.
And
then,
everybody went nuts at that.
and then the church, by the way, that's not true. There was never a time in American history where you had to be Christian. Nope. There are places where you had to believe in God. Those are no longer enforceable. Mm-hmm. And there is a tradition of, if you believe in Christianity, it's probably going to help you electorally, but it's not a rule. So I don't know what he's talking about. But anyway, the Tulsa World newspaper was like, so what do you mean by all that?
Wait, really? They called him out?
Yeah. They said, are you advocating that the government needs to be Christian, run by Christians? And he said, quote, no.
Oh,
my point,
you misunderstand.
My point would be that I think people that are informed by Christian values make good public servants, and they have a servant's heart. See, Jews are cool. I made that last part up, is what he said. But he said all that. He's like, no, I didn't say we need Christians only in government. I'm just saying if the government was run by Christians, that's a good thing. Don't ask me about the follow-up to that question.
I mean, these things are very much things that they expect never to be called out on, because when they say
to their crowd.
Yeah, they're speaking to their crowd, and you know what I mean. I know what I mean. We're all in on the in joke.
J.D. Vance's entire campaign. It's like, no, I was being sarcastic when I talked about childless cat ladies.
Yeah.
And then he also said during that speech to the congregation, this is Van Norman, that homelessness, which he has said, and he's right probably, that homelessness is one of the biggest issues the next mayor needs to deal with. Mm-hmm. He said it's not primarily a housing issue.
Are you sure?
It's a drug addiction issue.
Oh.
It's a mental health issue.
Okay.
That is not true. He was asked about that. He didn't really have a response to that. Oh.
And also, what is he doing about mental health issues?
Yeah.
Is he making sure everybody has access to mental health care?
With universal health care?
Yeah, making sure everybody has access to anti-overdose thing. What are those called?
No one
There's
knows.
a name for that.
They just need Jesus.
Nope.
Jesus. That's
Jesus.
What they need. And then he said,
when they say that, it's a mental health issue, do they think that's end of the conversation?
Yeah, I mean,
some
they
people
do it every
are
time
cuckoo bananas, crazy pants, and there's nothing
there's a mass
anybody can
shooting,
do about it.
They're like, it's a mental health issue. Oh, okay. What are you doing about mental health since you're not doing anything about guns?
I want to be very clear. We're doing nothing, but we definitely want to make sure you do not think it's the fault of guns.
Right. So Van Norman also said in his speech to the congregation that church-state separation was, quote, clearly established law. I'm sorry, he said this to the Tulsa World. He said church-state separation is, quote, clearly established law right now.
Right now?
Right now.
In Oklahoma.
What does that mean?
Because Oklahoma does still fall under the purview of the United States of America, am I correct?
It is
Therefore,
a state,
the First Amendment
I have been
would
told.
be applicable here.
Yes.
Okay.
And then when Jackson Lahmeyer returned on stage with his electoral prop, he asked Van Norman, by the way, pop quiz for you, quote, how many genders are there?
Oh, come.
And then Van Norman says, there are 2. And let me give you the scientific definition of a woman.
And everybody went crazy on their feet,
and Van Norman
clapping.
says, scientific definition of a woman is it's an adult with 2 X chromosomes, a period. And Lahmeyer said, he's qualified to be mayor. He knows what a woman is.
Oh, boy. I have such bad news for you about periods. They do not last women's.
That too.
Oh, my God. Does that mean when I go through menopause, I'll officially be a gentleman and therefore can have some rights back?
That's exactly how everything works. So his answer, I mean, forget the 2X thing, which is not scientifically true.
Nope. Also a difference between sex and gender.
That too. His answer basically said, I'm going to make life miserable for LGBTQ people in Tulsa. Which guess what? That's where they would be in Oklahoma if they are in the state.
Sure.
Okay. So all of that already happened. A month ago, we talked about that then. And then this week was the election. Oh. He was the Republican in the race for mayor. And this is one of those elections where the top 2 candidates, like if you get 50% of the vote, you're the next mayor. If you don't get 50% of the vote, the top 2 people are going to go to a runoff, which happens to be the day of the presidential election in a couple months. Okay, so what happened in this race? There were 2 Democrats, which sounds horrible. Like 2 Democrats and this one Republican were really the candidates in the race, and then a bunch of stragglers. And I'm thinking, oh, that's horrible because all the Republicans pile on to one dude and the Democrats split the vote. So this guy could end up with 50% of the vote.
Sure. Mathematically,
both-
not great.
Right. Both Democrats got more votes than this guy did.
There's going to be a Democratic mayor of Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Not only is there definitely going to be a Democratic mayor of Tulsa, get this, Monroe Nichols, who would be the first black mayor of Tulsa.
Monroe Nichols.
Yes. He got 33.1% of the vote. Karen Keith, who was the other Democrat in the race, got 32.6% of the vote. And Van Norman, the Republican, 31.8% of the vote.
So there's not only going to be a Democrat mayor, but it is not going to be a white man.
It's not going to be a white man. It's not going to be a Republican because Van Norman was so off-putting to even, I think, some of those Republicans that, yeah.
Okay, haven't you know about my stance on optimism, that it's, going to kill me someday?
You're allowed to be optimistic about this because there's no Republican on the ballot come November
But I mean,
in this race
I'm
for
thinking-
Tulsa mayor.
If Tulsa,
The site of the Tulsa race massacre, could have the first black mayor of Tulsa soon.
if it can happen in Tulsa, if people are getting
Right.
sick of Republican shit in Tulsa,
After they've had a
Oklahoma.
Republican mayor for 18 years, like popular enough to keep winning
Same
election.
mayor?
Yeah, same dude. I'm sorry, I take that back. I don't know if they've not the same dude for 18 years.
But it's always been a Republican.
It's been a Republican. And that guy only, he just said, I'm stepping down to do something else, whatever it is. That's the only reason he's probably not winning. He probably would have won again.
So this guy in the church is not the sitting mayor. He was
Correct.
just okay. Wow.
So it was an open
This
seat.
is wow. Is this hope that I'm feeling? What is that?
It's, wow.
I don't like it. It's
That
making me
didn't
sweat.
end poorly. And also surprising to me, first of all, a couple days ago, if you look on Brent Van Norman's Facebook page, breaking. New poll shows a dead heat for Tulsa mayor. Republican Brent Van Norman has surged against those two Democrats.
Or am
we
I?
need a big turnout to keep Tulsa Republican. Then he says he's endorsed by basically all the MAGA cultists.
Oh, sure. They
And
know what side the bread's buttered on.
after the election results came in, and it's like, oh, they're going to shut out the Republican from this race. He, to his credit, I guess, bare minimum, he accepted it.
That,
And
honestly,
here's-
to his credit.
He said this: congratulations to Monroe Nichols and Karen Keith for the job they've done. I wish them the best. But I would love to thank all our volunteers,
Sure.
which is totally fine.
Yeah, that's a very good concession.
Fine.
Not
yeah,
good. It's
I agree.
acceptable.
I agree. I did find it interesting. He didn't mention God once in that concession.
Well, God already fucked him over, I guess, so he didn't want to play that card twice.
It's the same thing I say when it's like an athlete who loses a big game. You were really God's going to help me to victory. And if you won, you would have said God wanted me to win. But they never mentioned God in the press conference afterwards. I'm like, hey, buddy. What do you think? What sign is God sending
Is
you
God
now?
mad at you, do you think? What do you think?
Did you
Sir,
do
what do you
something?
think you did that made God so mad?
Right? And by the way, there was also in the Tulsa world, they had some pictures from the election night watch parties for all three of those candidates. And you could see at Monroe Nichols and Karen Keith's events, you see this diverse spectrum of supporters, very DNC-ish, where it's you look around, you see a full spectrum of America. And Van Norman's watch party looked exactly as you would expect a Republican's watch party.
Just white,
Need I say more?
besuited people.
So, and by the way, I think Republicans were also kind of mad, not just because of the stuff he said about religion, because that's how all Republicans act now, but this is a guy who only came to Oklahoma 3 years ago and now is like, yeah, I should be mayor of the biggest city in Oklahoma.
I didn't know that
They
part.
didn't like that this Republican just parachuted in and acts like he owns the place.
Classic carpetbagger, eh?
He came because
Where's he from?
I don't know, but one of his kids attended Oral Roberts University and maybe had a baby. And so he's like, oh, I'm going to move back to help take care of my family, which is
Sure.
fine.
Yeah.
And now he's like, you know what I should do? I should run everything.
I'm looking around and it's terrible
Which
here.
would not have been good for either party. But again, those two other candidates have a history of, working.
Living in
and living
Oklahoma?
in Oklahoma, and this guy does not. So interesting result,
That's
there.
exciting.
right?
It's very exciting.
Let's talk about Kentucky.
Hey.
You don't have a song about that.
Oh, that's true, but I can talk to you about my friends from Kentucky.
Nope, don't care.
Okay.
So this November, this is interesting. There's an amendment that'll be on the ballot in November when they're all voting for all the other offices that will basically get to voters will get to decide if they want to screw over their public school system and funnel millions of dollars to religious indoctrination centers.
Oh, and where do we fall on that?
We are against.
Are we?
We are.
Okay,
we
I'm
would
going to write
vote
that down.
No. Yeah.
I'd hate to get this one wrong.
So it's called Amendment 2, and basically this is what it'll be on the ballot. Here's the wording. To give parents choices in educational opportunities for their children, are you in favor of enabling the General Assembly to provide financial support for the education costs of students in kindergarten through 12th grade who are outside the system of common public schools by amending the Constitution, yada, 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 no one cares. Basically, the Kentucky Constitution
They're like, we have
says...
so much money going into our public schools here that we're going to skim some off the top.
Kentucky's Constitution says public funds may only be used to support the common schools. And by common schools, they mean public schools.
They're commonwealth.
And what this amendment would say is, do you want to allow taxpayer dollars to go outside that? So we got to change the Constitution to allow money to go elsewhere. Euphemistically, that's the euphemistic way of saying like, oh, this is vouchers. This is school choice. They want to create a way that the Republican legislature in Kentucky could say, let's give people money if they want to go to a private school. And those private schools are almost always religious schools.
And almost always Christian schools.
Yeah. Right now, I was surprised to see this. Kentucky is actually one of the states that does not have a voucher program.
Okay.
But we talked about this back in June. The Washington Post had a really great article on voucher programs. Right now, the amount of money that some states are giving to private religious schools is wild. In just 5 states, more than 700,000 students are receiving taxpayer-funded vouchers. And that means billions of dollars are propping up these private schools. That could be up to $16,000 per student per year in some cases. And there is no shortage of stories like in Arizona where they're like, oh, yeah, we want to do this, but it's going to cost us this much money. And then they pass it because the Republican legislature passes it. And it balloons into some debacle that's just eating away at whatever budget they have. Like it just takes over. And there is a progressive-leaning Kentucky Center for Economic Policy. I believe it's progressive-leaning. But they estimated that if Kentucky were to adopt an educational voucher system like Florida's, it would cost Kentucky $1.19 billion annually, enough to pay for nearly 10,000 public school teachers and employees. That's if you follow Florida's model. The alternative is if you do what Arizona is doing, which is less money per kid through vouchers, it would still cost Kentucky about $200 million annually. That's about 1,650 Kentucky public school employees.
Jesus Christ.
So, like, either way, if you approve this amendment, we're looking at between $200 million or $1.2 billion, a difference of $1 billion, somewhere in there.
Sure.
That would be taken out of the money going to public schools and funneled into private, mostly Christian schools.
Look up Kentucky's education ranking while you speak. Go ahead.
And by the way, Kentucky Republicans haven't said which of those two paths they would take, the $200 million or $1.2 billion. They actually are avoiding a lot of details because all of it's moot unless Amendment 2 passes. What we do know is, this is according to the director of Kentucky policy, Amendment 2 would provide a blank check to the legislature to allow them to fund private schools for the first time. And they also pointed out it would hurt rural Kentucky, which is a lot of Kentucky, more because, quote, a voucher system could disproportionately impact poorer rural counties where property values are low and therefore generate less property tax revenue for schools than in districts with more valuable real estate, which is true because rural counties, rural areas, you need state funding to prop up your public schools. If you're saying, yeah, you know those $3 we give you every year, we're going to take that away and give it to a private school, you're only hurting those public schools even more.
Kentucky is ranked somewhere between 32nd and 42nd in education.
Yeah, and again, if that's with the limited resources they have. And remember, even though Kentucky has a Democratic governor, if this constitutional amendment passes, you could fully Kentucky will probably have a Republican governor in time. This is something that would open the floodgates to that sort of spending. And by the way, it would also create additional problems, because imagine this. What if Kentucky parents, if Amendment 2 passes, what if parents decide to homeschool their kids because they know they could get voucher money from the state to support homeschooling? They would get thousands of dollars per kid per year to do that. But homeschooling in Kentucky requires there's very little oversight.
Right.
So we don't even know what those kids are learning. That's a problem with homeschooling in general. Different states have different rules about what parents have to submit to the state.
It's very hard to keep track.
And so now you'd be giving them thousands of dollars to homeschool their kids and not demanding that they say, like, yeah, my kid's learning anything.
Or like test them to make sure they can, I don't know, read.
Mm-hmm. And by the way, there's a retired attorney named John Schaff. He wrote an op-ed in the Lexington Herald-Leader urging people not to support Amendment 2. One of the things he pointed out is that there is a loophole here which allows religious schools to pocket the money while doing nothing. He said a church school could accept a child's voucher money, then, for reasons real or contrived, they could kick the kid out a month or two into the school year.
And keep the money.
And they would do that. They would just say, you broke our sin laws. You did something sinful.
Sorry, these are the Christian ones who are supposed to be more moral than the rest of us?
They like to think that, yes.
What is wrong with these people?
Schaff,
What
this
is
lawyer,
the fucking matter with
he
these
also
people
pointed
that
out-
they are stealing money from Kentucky public schools? For what? To what end? So they can have a new marble statue in their private schools? What the fuck are they doing?
So they can baptize the kids. By the way, Schaff also pointed out that in neighboring Indiana, where they do have a voucher program, lawmakers gave $439 million to private schools, quote, with church schools grabbing 98% of that amount.
I have long said that Indiana is the worst state in the union. It's one of the few states I've lived in. Fuck Indiana.
Yeah.
Absolutely fuck Indiana.
The Washington Post pointed out back in June, taxpayers in more than half the country are now directly funding creationism, homophobia, anti-trans misinformation, Sunday school nonsense, masquerading as actual history and science, and now Kentucky could join their ranks. I mean, again, taxpayer dollars should never be used to prop up religion. And instead of giving money directly to churches, which is kind of an obvious you can't do that,
Right.
conservatives have now figured out a way to get that taxpayer money to their religious schools while also destroying legal precedent
And
along
they think
the way.
they're the good guys?
Yep. And by the way, another
Is there
thing we
a way
know.
to frame this that they're not villains?
No. Vouchers.
The G at the end of
one
villain.
thing we have figured out is that who's using these vouchers. In theory, the way the conservative politicians talk about it is we just want to give these families who don't have good public schools the choice to go somewhere where they can get the education they want.
And the idea is we're supplementing their having to pay for it.
Right, because otherwise they would be locked out of going there because they don't have the money to pay for it. And by the way, who uses these vouchers, though?
Rich
By
people.
and large, it's rich people who can already afford private schools, and they're like, well,
Yeah,
I'm
dog.
already paying for it, but you're going to give me money so it's not coming out of my pocket?
Also,
Those are the people using these vouchers.
Also, if your public schools are so bad that people feel like they need to get private education, maybe put more money into the public schools.
Yes, absolutely. So far, Kentucky's courts, every time they've tried to do something like this, Kentucky's courts have struck down any attempt to finance private schools, religious schools with public money. Why? Because the state constitution says we can't do that. Those same laws have prevented taxpayer dollars from funding charter schools, vouchers, tuition reimbursements for private schools. And so now Kentucky Republicans are like, let's get this on the ballot.
Yeah.
Let's word it in a confusing way, because all ballot initiatives tend to be confusing. And they're just saying, if we put choice right up front,
Yeah.
Democrats love choice. Maybe they'll pass Amendment 2. Andy Beshear, the governor, who could not stop this from appearing on the ballot, has already vocally opposed it.
Yeah.
Not a single elected Democrat, the 4 in Kentucky, have supported this bill. They're all urging Kentuckians to vote no on this proposal. But this will be on the ballot come November.
Yeah.
And that's,
I
I mean,
mean-
hopefully if you like public schools, vote no on this amendment so that your public schools can keep those taxpayer dollars.
Well, and in the last couple... In the last couple of years, Kentucky has protected, a woman's right to choose. They've elected Andy Bashir. I'm cautiously optimistic that there's enough momentum right now against this kind of very blatant Christian nationalism.
As long as they know what's on the ballot. And that's what Republicans are hoping they don't know.
Yeah.
If they are unaware of what they're voting on, they won't know whether to vote yes or no.
Okay, I just want to take a little step back. So we are talking about politicians who are manipulating their populace, whom they're supposed to be representing, into voting for a thing that is not good for them.
Yep.
And we are what is the conversation that the right-wing version of the Friendly Atheist podcast is having about Democrats? Are we doing stuff that is this fucking shady?
Their argument is we want to give parents the choice of where they get their education. Public schools shouldn't be the only game in town. And if it's private schools or religious schools that are the only other option, let's help pay for it so they can get their education. That's the argument they're making.
But I think a better argument would be we're going to make our public schools good enough that if you want to pick a religious school, it is only because you want a religious education, not because you think the quality of your education will be worse.
They could make that argument. The problem is they would say, public schools you can't fix them. Unions get involved. The bars, they teach things that parents don't want their kids to be taught.
History,
algebra, math, English, all that, reading. Yeah. They want your kids to read a second book. How dare they?
Yeah.
So their argument is public schools are just,
reading?
You can't fix them. That's it.
Oh, speaking of reading, I was reading my LBJ book yesterday, and I realized fucking LBJ was a debate coach, which is why Hammett likes him so much.
I do.
He was a bad dude, huh?
He kind of was, but he was very good at being a coach.
I mean, sounds like it. But anyway,
yes.
Bad guy so far. 400 pages into the thing, and he's like fucking 25. I'm going to be reading this until I die.
Just book one, man. So while we're on the subject, let me bring up a story I didn't get to last week, but it falls right in line with this. There was a training session in Florida a few weeks ago, and it was...
gator catching.
Yes, exactly. It was a pastor's training conference. All of you are about to be pastors of some church. Our organization, I think, is giving you money to help launch these churches, and we want you to build these into big, giant mega churches in the long run.
I hope no children were allowed within 1 mile of this site.
Or these people in the future, right? So one of the speakers this is literally called Pastors Training Conference.
Sure.
And it's hosted by a group called the Remnant Alliance, which the Texas Observer outlet, they recently ran a big article on the Remnant Alliance, and here's how they described it. This is a coalition of Christian nationalist groups that are, quote, working to educate, train, and mobilize conservative Christian congregations to influence the outcomes of local elections, especially school boards. That's the Remnant Alliance. And they're the ones running this training conference, okay?
Cool. Yeah, no notes.
Uh-huh. So one of the speakers of this place, their MO is like this, the Remnant Alliance. Their short version of what they do. Let's recruit pastors. Let's help them build their churches with a Christian nationalist agenda and draw in all these mega people. And then once we get that going, we can take over the whole community.
Sure.
And so...
just like Jesus wanted.
Exactly. And so one of the speakers at this training session was a guy named Jim Abney, who happens to be the coordinator in Florida of one of these Remnant Alliance groups. Like, his job is to train other pastors. He's their liaison between the group and these things. The actual training session did not take place in Florida, but this guy is from Florida, okay? So he was speaking to the crowd, and he was saying, you guys, my community, we followed the Remnant Alliance plan, and it's working in my town of Lake Wales, Florida.
Our literacy rate has dropped by 50%, and we couldn't be prouder.
He basically said, in my community, we have a pastor named Jack Hilligoss. You don't need to remember the name. Pastor Jack, and he's the senior pastor at High Point Church. And he was saying, this is the church I belong to. We've been using this playbook at my church, and it's been really successful. He basically said, for example, he pointed to a story that was published in a local newspaper about Pastor Jack basically taking over the community. And in this newspaper article, which was not brought up at the pastor's training conference, but I'm telling you what's in the article, it said that Pastor Jack told congregants that if you're not already registered to vote, you can, quote, get right with God and sign up right after the service. Just go to the table back over there. And then he said, if you go to that...
registering people to vote is
theoretically,
good.
that's okay. He said, if you go to that registration table, I'm reading from the article, Hilligoss said they would find Lake Wales City Commissioner Danny Kruger, who is a member of High Point Church and has been a fantastic commissioner here for Lake Wales. And he needs your support. In fact, when you go to vote, just think of this, Danny and Danny, okay? That's all I'm going to say. So not only let's get the whole church registered to vote, but by the way, the guy behind the table is the guy you should be voting for. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
I wish I was paying more attention. I was just thinking about whether it'd be okay if I said Michigas because it rhymes with his last name, but I'm not Jewish. What do you think?
Then I
do you think that was a
will
good use of
avoid
my
it
time?
and let you take all the hate. And then in 2022, he's like, oh, by the way, Pastor Jack says, I'm going to run for mayor.
Oh.
And it worked.
Danny and Danny back together.
Yeah,
Wait,
yeah.
who is the other Danny?
No,
then?
this is Pastor Jack now. He's saying, I'm running for mayor because I'm your pastor.
Classic
and by
Jack.
the way, all of you are working for my campaign, more or less.
Congratulations, everybody.
Yeah.
You're hired.
And what did he do when he became mayor of Lake Wales?
Oh,
in
he did it.
He did it in 2022. What
Lake
happened?
Wales?
Yep.
Wales like the animal, Wales like the country.
Wales like the, it's not.
H is...
No H.
Okay.
The pastor, this is from the article, the pastor turned mayor ended a city tradition of offering proclamations for LGBTQ Pride Month.
Neat.
And has appointed members of his church to city boards.
What?
Looking beyond Lake Wales, Hilligoss has launched an initiative aimed at helping conservative evangelical Christians gain majorities on all municipal commissions in Polk County.
More like Michigas. You're right. Am I right? Right? Get
I
it?
quit this podcast.
Michigas.
He also, Pastor Jack has also had invocations at every city commission meeting, all of which are given by Christian pastors.
Obviously.
He did that because he was very...
Christian pastors? How many fucking pastors
He
do
was
they have?
very upset that a, quote, transgender atheist was allowed to give an invocation before I became mayor. And that's never happening again.
Sorry, you're still mad about that,
He's
sir?
still mad about that. He said by the way, he's also an election denier. He's an anti-masker. He's everything you would expect.
Sure.
But the point...
God, I haven't heard anti-masker in a minute.
I know. The reason Jim Abney, the speaker at this pastor's training, was bringing all this up is he said, that's my pastor.
Look how good we did.
Look how good we did. We didn't just build out our church. This guy became mayor, and now all of our buddies are taking over the community, and your church could do the same thing.
This is the Christian version of Wild Wild Country, where people just move in and take over, and then we're all red.
And he's now promoting that game plan to the pastors in the audience, right? He also told them how Hilligoss appointed all these Christians in positions of power. He said... To the people at the pastor's training session, he said, the biggest villain, if you will, was the LGBTQ community. But don't worry, they ended the Pride proclamations and shut down an all-ages drag show. Yes.
Thank God.
So success. And what's the end game? He told the audience. Why are we doing this? The goal is winning converts, basically. It's to expand God's kingdom. And then, this is the part I really wanted to share with you all.
Okay.
He said in Lake Wales, we're doing this by starting our own private school through the church. And he tells the audience that when Hilligoss became mayor, it brought new attention to our church, because he runs it, which increased membership of the church, which led to more students enrolling in their school, which led to more baptisms. And that's the end goal, more baptisms. And then he said a part that shocked me. He said, the best part about all this, who's paying for it all?
Oh, God.
Florida taxpayers. Because the school gets nearly $8,000 per kid, and a large number of them are getting converted. And I'm going to play you this clip of what he said. It's a longer clip because it's kind of all of this in a nutshell. But here he is explaining to the attendees at the pastor's training conference why his church's model worked so well. This is, again, Jim Abney speaking.
Is this quiet part out loud shit?
This is, it's quiet part out loud shit. And also, he's basically just saying out loud, you guys, we're using taxpayer dollars to baptize people. Like, we're connecting the dots, and that's where they go.
Yeah.
And all right, here he is.
And let me show you the results.
This is villain monologue.
Participating and engaging our community. All right. So when Pastor Jack first decided to run for mayor, we were in the middle of a new building program, getting ready to move into the new building. We had an average attendance of about 400. Since then, we now have an average attendance of 1,300.
Jesus.
And 2,000 people now call High Point Church their home. You will lose some people at the beginning when you take a stand, but God will prune the vine and start new growth. We started a Christian school called Providence Academy. Anybody here located in the state of Florida? All right, state of Florida. If you do not have a Christian school in your church, I don't know what to tell you. The state of Florida will pay your church, out of taxpayer dollars, $7,800 per pupil per year to attend your private school. Okay? So, we started Providence Academy. In our first year, we just completed 103 students.
Accepted, I think is what he meant.
Yeah, but out of that 103 students, we baptized 32 of them. A private school, small town, Lake Wales, Florida. And the state this year will send High Point Church, Providence Academy, $1.3 million to cover our expenses. If you have a church in Florida, you need to be doing this. You want to make a difference in your community? It's generational. And many of these students now their families now attend High Point Church. We have baptized a total since Pastor Jack became mayor, 197 in our church.
Okay, so that's kind of where he was going with that. It's bad enough that these people want to take over local governments to act out their theocratic fantasies. They're literally bragging about how they can use taxpayer dollars to boost their conversion numbers by targeting kids. If a drag queen said that, these Christians would call that grooming, and they would demand statewide investigations. But this is how vouchers work.
I think they're using the same playbook as the cigarette companies did.
Get them
early.
Yep. And again, as we just mentioned in the last story, voucher programs are on the rise specifically because they're letting taxpayer dollars go to private religious schools. But in Florida specifically, as we mentioned, those $7,800 vouchers have been a drain on everybody. When it was signed into law last year, those vouchers were supposed to cost between $200 and $700 million a year. This year, however, it's the first time anyone was eligible to get those vouchers. The cost is now estimated between $2.8 and $4.2 billion. And about 70% of the recipients were already at private schools before the vouchers came to them.
Cool. So now they have more money to donate to their church.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Now,
Florida, by the way, is ranked 48th when it comes to teacher pay.
Oh, you don't say. Mm-hmm. And now how much tax is Mar-a-Lago putting into the public school education fund?
I don't know. I heard it's in a box in the bathroom. All the money that they're supposed to give. I did ask a couple.
What if he declared Mar-a-Lago its own little sovereign nation
and start a church from there?
Honestly, I wouldn't be mad if we could get everybody to move down to Mar-a-Lago. Fucking see you never, dorks.
I did ask a couple attorneys, what this guy said. He can't be saying this, right? That seems shady. Americans United for Separation of Church and State, Rachel Laser, their president, told me this. Americans United opposes private school vouchers because they force taxpayers to fund religious education, a clear violation of religious freedom. The bottom line is that public money should fund public schools, which are inclusive, improve communities, and strengthen democracy. We should be giving public schools the proper resources to serve all families, not diverting money to private, mostly religious schools that serve relatively few students and do not welcome all children. which, yes.
That's a good point, too.
Is,
if every kid cannot go there, then...
And if you're openly LGBTQ, guess what? These Christian schools are going to be
not going to be into your thing.
Yeah, and that's just one example. What if they commit some sort of sin that the Christian church decides is a sin?
Well, they get punted out and they keep the money. I think they covered that, haven't
So anyway, disturbing.
Cool. Really, really good stuff on the horizon for the Christian community. Yeah.
Want some somewhat good news? I was able to finally compile a list of, and that's never the good way to start anything.
Yeah, I'm already bored, actually.
All the openly...
If it's a spreadsheet, now we're talking.
It is a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
Of all the openly non-religious candidates running for public office.
Wow.
And just to
Truly
give you some
doing
background.
God's work, Kevin.
I try. When Gallup every
when
couple
your
of years.
children are like, how come we haven't seen Daddy for 3 days? Or you're like,
Shut
I'm
up,
working on this spreadsheet.
Standing over Excel. Right. Gallup asks a question like every couple of years. Would you vote if your party nominated a generally well-qualified person for president who happened to be blank? Would you vote for that person? And they've done this for many, many years. And so, for example, right now, this is before Kamala Harris, but like, would you vote for a woman? Like, doesn't matter if you're a Republican or Democrat. All things being equal, would you be okay voting for a woman if that was your candidate? Right now, 93% of Americans say, yeah, that's fine. Some of them say no opinion.
Is that higher or lower than I wanted
That is
it to
highest
be?
on the list.
Oh.
Yeah.
But like
would you vote?
93%, that's pretty good, I guess.
It's
considering it's everyone.
Considering where it used to be, 93 is fine. Would you vote for a Hispanic person? 93%.
Okay.
This is from earlier this year, by the way.
That feels right.
Would you vote for a Catholic? 92%. Like, they're not bothered by it.
Who's tapping out from what, Mexican to Catholic?
One person's like, I'll vote for a Hispanic person. But a Hispanic Catholic? What? Yeah, no.
I've never heard of such a thing.
Would you vote for a black person? 92% said yeah.
Okay.
Jewish is next, 88%. Gay or lesbian.
Wait, who are the people who are not voting for a Jew in the year of our Lord 2024?
They didn't break it down by party for that one, but...
Oh, I guess I have some suspicions now that you say that. I have to remember that this is all people.
Would you vote for a gay or lesbian? It's at 74% now, which is much higher than it used to be.
Okay, I will take 74%.
What's interesting about this survey is that they've run it so many times over the past several decades.
Sure.
You can see the trends emerging. So would you vote for a black person for president? It used to be relatively low, but once there were options like Barack Obama, it's like, oh, yeah, I'm fine voting for a black
instead of like
person.
a phantom black gangbanger that you're
Correct.
inventing in your brain, it's like fucking Barack Obama.
Right. And to the point where even Republicans are like, yeah, if there was a conservative Republican that I liked, like, I'm fine with it. That's not a hindrance to me voting for that person.
Yeah.
Which that tracks. Okay,
Sure.
fine. Okay, so what's interesting on my end is the numbers for atheist, because there was a time when atheist was always the lowest thing on the list.
Like 30-something%, right?
Oh,
for a
less
while?
than that.
Yeah.
In the 50s, it was way less than that. But when they ran it this year, atheist, would you vote for a qualified atheist from your party? 60%.
Wow.
Right?
That's almost 2/3 of people.
Almost, yeah. By the way, you know what's lower
Who's a
than
math
atheist?
teacher now, motherfucker? What's lower than atheist?
What is lower than atheist?
Okay, wait, let me think. Christian nationalist?
A socialist.
Well, yeah.
But I got to say, before Bernie Sanders was running in 2016, socialist was like next to nothing on the list.
Yeah, fair enough.
But once you got a Democratic socialist candidate, it rose up quite a bit.
Sure.
And so I've always argued, like, if there was actually a top-of-the-line candidate who was openly atheist, I don't know if it would hurt them as much as, I mean, it would not hurt them as much as it used to.
Yeah.
It would hurt them probably still. We're in America. But it is like, thanks, Bernie, because we're no longer at the bottom of the list.
Yeah.
And they ask about socialists now all the time. By the way,
That's true.
But when they did it this year, they also asked people, would you vote for a candidate who's over the age of 80? That was actually very low, 31%.
Huh. How old is Trump?
Trump is like 78. Biden was above 80. But they asked, like, would you vote for someone above 80?
Has that
It was
always
very
been
low.
a question? Or
No. They only started asking that now, but it's interesting that had very low response because Republicans were presumably against it, and so were a lot of Democrats. They also asked, what if about someone who's charged with a felony crime? They did ask that this time around. That's 29%. How about someone convicted of a felony crime? 23%. So interesting. Like,
Wait.
there are some things.
Do you think this is a case of people not considering Trump getting convicted? You know what I mean? Like, are they like, well, not Trump?
They tried to cover the bases. They're just like, would you be okay voting for someone from your party if they were a convicted felon? And 23% are like, well, I'm okay with that.
That doesn't seem like that many people. Assuming, say, approaching 100% of Democrats said, no, I wouldn't vote for a convicted felon.
I mean, there were Republicans who said, no, if he's convicted.
That means only half of the people.
I mean, right? So, interesting numbers.
I'm just wondering,
that is
in my
before
head,
the political realities kick in and we add a name to the mix and all that. But I was surprised that Atheist is not at the bottom of the list. We're actually like several away. But it does raise the question that if only 60% of Americans say, I would be comfortable voting for an atheist, there is still a big stigma that exists. And again, the argument I would make is once you start seeing candidates who are openly non-religious, whether or not they're atheists, that will actually make it easier for everyone else to come out as atheists because it's not that big of a deal anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that's why I began putting together the spreadsheet. I think I started in 2018 or something.
Wow,
and
real labor of love.
This is with the help of the Center for Free Thought Equality, which is the political arm of the American Humanist Association, because they helped me compile this stuff. And what I found this time around, these are candidates who have already won their primaries.
Okay.
So these are not anybody can sign up to be on the ballot in a primary. These are ones who won their primaries and will be on the ballot this November.
Okay.
The number, which by the way changes daily because there are still some primaries yet to come.
People drop out.
Every now and then stuff happens. I'm counting like 160 candidates at the state level.
160?
160 who are openly non-religious. And like if you look at the list, we have everything from openly atheist, secular, culturally Jewish, no religious affiliation, secular humanist.
Can I see your spreadsheet?
Yeah. Unitarian, universalist, and a pagan, atheist, and humanist. Looking through here, what else we got? No longer involved in organized religion. Secular Buddhist, agnostic spiritual.
Spiritual humanist.
I know, there's a bunch of things on this list, and they are from all over the country, red states as well as blue states. And these are labels they are using to describe themselves. They were not like check off a thing on a list. It said, what label would you use to describe yourself? And the Center for Free Thought Equality gives endorsements. I am offering no endorsements here, but like there were...
Yeah, you really want that friendly atheist boost.
No, it was more like there were candidates that got endorsed who are religious, but they said, I'm just an ally of your community.
I see.
That's all well and good. I don't care for the spreadsheet. That's all nice. But like my favorite is New Hampshire, where there are like 12 people who live in New Hampshire, but they have 400 members of their state house. One for every 3 houses. One of you is like
and 12 quadrillion businesses are stationed there as well.
But like there are literally like 20 candidates on the primary ballots. Their primaries in a week or something. But it's like, oh my God, New Hampshire has a gazillion openly non-religious people.
Which is insane because they pay like $14 in tax a year. So like, what are you guys trying to control here?
There are also people who won their primaries who are from like, I'm looking here, Utah, South Carolina, we have Georgia, Arkansas. Like these are candidates who are going to be on the ballots. Most of them are challengers, which does mean in a lot of these places, they are going to lose their races.
Sure.
However, that's not the point. It's the fact that they are the major party candidate for these tickets. These are almost everybody. I'll get to the almost in a second. They're almost all Democrats on the ballot for statewide races. Incredible. And they're saying like, you know what? I'm okay saying I am Jewish and secular, like one Florida senator running for the Florida Senate, because they're like, I don't think this is the issue that's going to make or break my candidacy.
Sure.
So that's exciting.
And I really think it's important to especially for people who are younger, like I'm not even 40 yet, but when I was in my 20s, atheism was a dirty word. Like, people did not admit to not being Christian. They just simply did not.
A magazine article in a left-wing magazine, but the cover story, I've used this in presentations I've given, said something like, is atheism the last taboo in politics? By the way, it wasn't.
No.
But the fact
being
that...
a felon turns out to be.
Yeah, it turns out, Being gay, being trans, those are other taboos here. But being a black woman governor of a state turns out to be a taboo. But that was a stigma. It could make or break your candidacy. And you have all these candidates, several of whom are incumbents in office running for re-election saying, yeah, I'm fine telling you that I'm a non-believer. I'm an agnostic. I'm an atheist.
Because it wasn't even necessarily about like how the person wanted to express it. It was certainly their right-wing opponent who would just
who could have used it against them.
And often did.
Yes.
They're going to try to make this
by the
whatever.
Way, as someone who has tracked this for a while, I rarely see any of these labels come up in attack ads from the other side. It doesn't happen anymore. It used to be
like de rigueur. If you're an atheist, that is going, or not religious or whatever, it's going to be used against you in some strife, especially in rural America.
Very rarely does this stuff get used against them because I think even Republicans are like, if I'm trashing for whatever reason, openly non-religious candidates, I'm turning off a whole slice of voters that I might use.
Think that?
I mean, of all the ways you could go after someone, even in red states, it's like you would think this is an easy one.
Yeah, I guess
but they don't do it.
Wondering why they step back. Maybe the socialism angle is more damaging in their eyes than...
I feel like the political winds have shifted to saying conservatives will absolutely say, I'm a Bible-believing Christian, and that's why you should vote for me. But saying it would be awful for them to say, my opponent is Muslim, and that's why you shouldn't vote for them. They're atheist. They're Jewish. They're something else.
Yeah.
It would backfire. There would be a lot of bad press. Maybe not from voters.
Sure.
But it would get a lot of negative media attention.
Sure.
And why put yourself in that position? So, again, the more people who come out as openly non-religious, the easier this gets. Again, lots of incumbents on the list as well who have been in office for a while. So exciting to see.
So did you have to drill down onto each candidate to figure them? Like, there's no...
The Center
You're
for Free
creating
Thought,
a database.
I have, which sounds nefarious.
I mean, and not to be an asshole, but I could give you a couple tips on your spreadsheet. I think I think there's some aesthetic choices that you made that I would not.
Listen, this is for my usage.
Okay,
more
well,
than it
if
is.
we're making this public facing, I'm getting my hands on that.
The Center for Free Thought Equality sends out, after they find out you're like on the ballot, they, like many organizations, will say, hey, we are from the Center for Free Thought Equality. This is what we do. If you want our endorsement, fill out this short form. And one of them does ask for the religious label.
I see.
And if they give you the endorsement, that label is on their website. So a lot of these came from their endorsements. Some of them, they didn't seek out an endorsement, but they've made their religious views clear in other ways.
I got you.
So not all of these are endorsed by them. They're just there. By the way, 7 people running for the U.S. House as Democrats, as challengers, are openly non-religious.
Wow.
Now, I think every single one of them is running in a very red area. So they're like, I got nothing to lose.
Sure,
Let me tell you
tracks.
who I am, and I'm not going to hide it. And they're not going to lose because of this.
Yeah,
they're going to lose because they're a Democrat in a red area.
I mean, there certainly is a freedom of like, well, I'm probably not going to win anyway, so I might as well like pull out all the tricks.
And which is I just read a story the other day where in Iowa, where Republicans have like a supermajority of the legislature, they didn't even run a candidate in one ruby red district for whatever the reason was. But a Democrat did run in that race, and that is now the only person on the ballot come November. Period. Like,
wait, there's no incumbent?
Republicans, maybe that person is stepping away or something, but Republicans are not fielding a candidate. Maybe there was a last-second problem. Someone dropped out that they thought was going to run. But the Democrats already won that race. And the point is, when you run in elections, think about these 7 House candidates.
Boy, the Republicans are resting on their laurels
these
there,
are 7 candidates in Indiana, Louisiana, Ohio, Texas, and Wisconsin in red districts. But again, when you put yourself out there, not just as a Democrat, but as an openly non-religious Democrat, you are giving people an incentive like, God, I want someone to vote for, and I don't want to vote for the Republican who's probably going to win. Give them an option. And by the way, that also lifts up lower seats where it's like, well, I wasn't going to go vote anyway, but I want to vote for you because you're awesome, even though you're going to lose. So I'm going to vote for city council, school board members.
Or, I never thought about running because I'm an atheist or I'm gay or whatever. And, this guy is running and he's running in a red district. Could I run? Hey, if you're listening to this podcast, I bet you could run for office. Have you heard about the dum-dums we talk about on this show?
Right.
There is no intelligence test to become an elected official in this country. And I have to think people who listen to this are smarter than your general population,
Now,
right?
I said almost all of them are Democrats. There are 2 names on the list who are not Democrats, interestingly enough.
Independents?
One of them in New Hampshire, who is an incumbent, is a guy named Brandon Finney, who we have talked about, I think, a long time ago, because this is a guy who was a Republican and was elected as such. Then he shifted after I outed him. He publicly made it clear, and I asked him, I'm like, are you an atheist? And he told me, yes. I'm like,
I remember this guy.
That's weird. You know that, right? Can I... And he's like, no, you could say it. I'm not hiding it. Everyone knows. I'm like, interesting. He was a Republican. He then decided to become like a libertarian. And then he lost his race to a Republican. And then he ran again as a Republican in 2022 and won that seat. And now he's running again. That guy is an atheist. So there's that.
Yeah.
And there's also...
I'm not excited about a libertarian being part of our group, but I guess big tent and all that.
Like I said, these are not all endorsements. And the other one is that there's a guy named Ryan Armagost who is in the Colorado House, an incumbent since 2023. So this is his second time running, or at least hoping for a victory. He's an agnostic. And he said in a local newspaper that he's a Republican who believes in a higher power, but he's agnostic. And he uses that label, agnostic. And I'm like,
That's not what that means.
That still kind of counts, even if you don't want to define higher power. But I found that interesting. He's also a Republican.
If you believe in a higher power, then you're necessarily not an agnostic. You're like a deist, I guess.
Again, listen, if you're a Republican, you're confused in many ways.
Fair enough.
I would argue.
Yeah,
but anyway, so there are 2 Republicans on the list. Every single other person is running as a Democrat. All 160 some.
Sure tells you a lot about the parties.
It does. By the way, every member of the Congressional Free Thought Caucus, which has more than 24 members, one is retiring from the U.S. House. Everyone else is running. And again, most of them are openly religious, but they are part of the Congressional Free Thought Caucus as well. So that'll be interesting to watch. But this is 160 is higher than I've ever tracked before. That's kind of amazing.
Things are changing.
Yeah.
Things are changing.
I had another good news story for you as well. I'm going to save that. I got one other story for you.
Save that?
Sorry.
For next week or
no,
for
I'll
later?
do it in a second.
Oh.
Get this. Okay.
Doing some producing here.
I know. Doing this on the fly. For 2 years, there was a guy named Jordan Cernick who taught high school English at a public school district in Wisconsin. He signed up for a coaching gig.
Do you know where in Wisconsin?
Argyle School District. I don't know where that is. But he was a coach at the school, which is something new teachers do. His evaluations were fine. And then in his second year of teaching, the district instituted a new policy that said teachers have to use the names and pronouns of students as requested.
Uh-oh.
So what do you think this guy did?
Oh my God. I bet he was really respectful for the journey that his students were on.
And that is why we are discussing
became, a really safe space for kids to come to when they really weren't sure what was going on in their own lives and their own bodies.
So
and
close.
they feel like they couldn't turn to anybody. But there's always this coach who takes them as they are and
You're
believes
talking about
them.
walls. Yeah. No, basically, Cernick said, I'm not going to do it because it's going to violate my Christian beliefs.
Oh.
And then the school tried to accommodate it to the point of absurdity. For example, he said, what if I just don't use any of my students' names? I'll just point to them. Maybe I'll nod in their direction.
Oh, I know exactly where this is.
Right?
I've gone through here a lot. This is horse country where it's in. It's like southwest of Madison near, do you know New Glarus, where all the beer comes from?
Oh, I've heard of it.
Yeah. Anyway, it's right by there. I've been through
Okay.
this area. It's beautiful country.
At one point, so he's like, can I just nod at the kids and not say anybody's name? And the school's like, yeah, I guess. At one point, he says, can I call a trans student by their last name? Which he did not do for other students. He's like,
I
is
guess
that
if
a
you called
good middle
everybody
ground?
by their last name, that's
His argument. I'm doing something for everybody, so I'm not singling out trans people.
Does this come up that much in schools that these people
Well-
are like throwing their entire careers away because one kid is like, could you call me they? And they're like, I can't.
Right.
I just can't.
That pretty much is how it goes. Well, in this case, there was at least one or two students this affected. And the student kind of agreed, you can call me by my last name, I guess. But the student's
But it's-
father, who taught at the school, is like, no, you're going to call my son or daughter by whatever they want to go by.
Okay, dad hero.
Uh-huh. So at some point, it becomes clear he is treating the trans students, and there were at least two in his classes, he's treating them differently, right? Whatever the stupid compromise he thinks exists in his head, he's treating them differently. And according to a 2022 letter from a district administrator, this guy was still using the wrong names for trans students, and students and families were reporting, quote, several concerns. Okay.
Several concerns. What did you say he was a coach of?
I don't know.
Oh.
That same letter said you also have to use those students' preferred names when you're making rosters for substitute teachers.
Oh, I didn't think
And when you're making your seating chart, you got to use their proper name as well. He wouldn't do that because you can't nod in their direction on a seating chart or a roster for a sub.
Sir, to an end.
Yeah. So
To an end.
he responded to the administrator by saying, this is a long letter that
boy.
I have a copy of because thanks, public schools. He rejected the very existence of trans people. He said, each person is born a male or a female. There is no deviation from this reality. Then he said he couldn't possibly be misgendering students because, quote,
He's seen all of their penises and vaginas.
he says, quote, the name I call each student is legally and objectively his or her own name from birth. Therefore, I would argue that I am calling students by their right names.
Wow. Good job really ponying those 16-year-olds,
Yes.
you asshole.
So-
like, truly, technically, I'm actually calling them by their illegal name. Like, you fucker, you know what is the matter with these people? You're working with children. Children are so weird and delicate and smelly and stupid. Just like give them something they need. High school's miserable. I hated every moment of high school. And thank fucking Christ I wasn't trans on top of all of that. Can you just let these kids live their fucking life and call them what they want to be called? And what is so hard for these people to just be like, yeah, somebody is different than I immediately perceived of them. I guess I'll just have to adjust the way I see the world now. These people are out of their fucking minds.
You're saying how come these people aren't getting an education in a sense?
It's just so I mean, haven't I, before we started recording, we were talking about working with teenagers and how hard it is and how teenagers are off their fucking rockers, which is fine. That's your job
was
as a
your quote,
teenager.
not mine.
That was my quote. You were the one who said they smelled, so.
Mm-hmm.
But like, you just have to meet them where they are. You can't bully teens into being something that they're not. Trust me, they tried it for a fucking century and it didn't go great.
So this guy, he admits basically the district's allegations. Like, yeah, he is treating them unfairly. He's admitting it in this letter. And that means he's opening the district up to legal liability. Yeah. And he's only a second-year teacher at this point. So, like, they can do whatever they want with
Nobody's
him.
going to bat for him.
Well, and he doesn't have tenure.
Yeah.
Right? So his third year district did not renew his contract.
Oh, why?
And in a speech that he made to the school board before they voted on his non-renewal, he made it clear he didn't give a damn what the law said because God told him to be a bigot. In fact, we have prepared texts of his remarks to the school board. Here's what he said.
Oh, shit.
Wait for it. Throughout the United States.
Oh, fuck yourself. Absolutely go fuck yourself. Do not. First of all, throughout the United States is not an expression. Throughout the history of the United States,
Throughout the United States, students are showing increased signs of anxiety, fear, and attempted suicide.
Yeah, it's because they're getting bullied by adults in their school.
The solution is complex, but it starts with rebuilding a foundation of morality and truth on which to build our lives. Our kids need stability and security, and that comes from unchanging truths that have existed since the beginning of time. A kid can go outside and know he won't tip over because gravity is a real thing. There's a lot of fear and worry today because kids are unsure of what is true anymore.
Gravity. It's not like you lose your balance. You just stop being stuck to the ground. This man should not be around children.
Then he
doesn't understand gravity.
I am committed to truth, capital T, and reason,
justice
capital R,
in the American way,
which both teach and affirm only two sexes, male and female. There is no room for deviation, ... To play along with the farce of gender identity, like many adults are doing today, is to lessen the dignity of each person, ... I desire that those I disagree with would stop seeking happiness and peace in their sexual identity and instead find hope and security in Jesus.
He's literally saying, if this is a thing that makes you happy, don't fucking do it anyway.
And then he dropped his mic, I assume, and then the school board said, yeah, we're not.
I can't wait to never have to hear from you again, sir. Thank Christ this is the last time I had to hear your dumb face.
So all of this happened, and then they got rid of him.
Yeah.
And now he's suing the district, arguing that they forced him to violate his faith because of his sincerely held religious beliefs.
Sounds like they hella didn't force him to do anything.
Right. It's almost laughable. Oh, by the way, he says in the lawsuit, his lawyer says in the lawsuit.
What money is behind this lawsuit? Who's got his ear?
There is a right-wing group that's representing him.
Yeah, I figured.
I think. But anyway, he says in there, if my religious beliefs and personal liberty place me at odds with the school district of Argyle or even the United States Department of Education, so be it. And then the school district's like, all right, bye. And he's like, what?
The only person who can say so be it is Ariel's dad from Little Mermaid. That is the only person who can pull that off. And sir, you are no King Triton.
Like, the thing is, it's completely irrelevant that this guy had a faith. It was. It's irrelevant that he had a faith-based reason to belittle trans kids. Like, if you can't respect your students by calling them by their names, you shouldn't be a teacher. Mm-hmm. And again, his form of hate, it might be fine in a church. You expect it in a church. Mm-hmm. But public schools have a responsibility to be an inclusive space where all kids are safe. He could have made it clear that, of course, he made it clear he's not going to treat trans kids like everybody else. Right. He announced that in advance. Yep. So the school district had every right, if not a responsibility,
frankly, no choice.
Yeah, to punish him for it. It wasn't about his faith. It's about his actions, his refusal to follow the district's rules. And look, I'm sure there are plenty of Christians in this district. It's like relatively rural Wisconsin.
Yeah.
You're going to find other Christians there. There are probably Christian teachers who disagree with the district's policies on LGBTQ issues, but they're the ones who chose to work at a public school district, so they have to follow the district's rules. He seems to think being a Christian gives him a right to mistreat trans kids.
Well, that's, I feel like, a pretty understood tradition in Christianity across this country.
And all he had to do, just call them by their names, use their pronouns. It's not a hard ask. He wouldn't do it. Being a Christian is not a legitimate excuse to treat kids like shit.
I mean,
this guy should not have been working there. He thought their very sense of being was a mistake. He didn't want what's best for them because he only wants what's best for him.
And the fucking irony of him being like, depression, anxiety, and suicide are a real big problem. Yeah, dog, because adults are bullying teenagers and they just simply do not have the wherewithal or the worldview to understand that this is just one asshole. When a teacher is telling you who you are is not valid, how many other adults does this kid have to turn to? Thank God this one dude's dad was a teacher. Right?
Right, that trans student's dad was a teacher. And it's like, no, you're not going to treat my son or daughter differently.
He was not only a teacher, but respected his kid's life.
So I looked up this dude. Sorry.
Wait, I'm not done yelling about suicide. This shit is what makes me fucking insane, is the idea that teachers are like, kids are committing suicide because the internet. And it's just like, no, really what's happening is they are being bullied in their schools. Some of them have mental health issues that people are not addressing or taking seriously. Some people are having trouble with their identity. And if nobody is supporting a young person who feels like they are not the right shape, they're not in the right body, what is a kid to do if they can't turn to their teacher? Their one teacher is bullying them at school. Their parents aren't taking them seriously. Yeah, dog, this is why kids are killing themselves, is because you are telling them their entire existence is invalid. Go ahead.
Agreed. I looked up this dude because he's a graduate of Reformed Baptist Seminary. Surprise, surprise.
A seminary graduate.
But he has a bio on that website, and he writes on this. This is one of those bios you submit, right, for yourself.
God.
He writes on there.
Did he write in third person?
Yeah, which is fine. That part I don't have a problem with. Actually, no, this is first person.
First person?
But he says when he first began preaching, quote, "People would leave the middle of my sermon in disgust. One woman stared at me for an entire service with a hateful scorn. The word of God is offensive." Basically saying, yeah, so what? Because
What was he saying?
I don't know, but I can guess.
Was it racist?
Maybe. Who knows?
Like, you can't just be
He's
like...
proud of this, by the way.
No,
He's saying
I
this because he's
know.
proud.
That's what my question is. Like, the word of God is offensive to whom? To people who are black? To people who are trans? People who are gay?
Basically, he's saying, I'm going to preach whatever I preach, and if you can't handle it,
It's on you.
it's on you. And you know what else he said in that same bio?
He's bragging
Check it
about
out.
this. And he wants to work with children. This guy is clearly an antagonist.
Here's what he writes. Oh, by the way, he works in Illinois now. In 2022, he said, I was called by Nora Community Church, which is in a small town called Nora, Illinois, to serve as their pastor while teaching at a public school. I think when he lost his job at a public school, now that's his full-time job. But one of the things he says in this bio, recently, I lost my job at the public school because I refused to go along with the farce of gender ideology. Then in parentheses, even in our rural communities, this battle rages.
So he's like right over the border in like central northern Illinois. Interesting.
Right over the Wisconsin border. So anyway, his brand of hate is alive and well. Thankfully, it's just no longer at a public school. And by the way, along the same lines, I don't know if you saw this story because it's local news in Chicago anyway, but do you remember during the DNC, Tim Walz gave his speech and there were cutaways to his kids in the audience. And his daughter was like tears in her eyes, making a little heart with her hands. That was adorable. The son was crying, saying, "That's my dad." And Ann Coulter, the right-wing person, was like, she made fun of him.
Yeah.
Saying like, I don't remember what she said. It doesn't matter. It was really dickish. But she made fun of the kid. And she got so much backlash because the kid has developmental disabilities that she's like, well, I didn't know he had that.
I thought I was just picking on a regular child.
Right. And then that's pretty much what she said. Well, in Chicago, where there is a right-wing radio station, there is a show hosted by one woman and another guy.
What radio station is this?
I don't know. One of the AM channels.
Oh, got you.
Like, the guy
it's not Eric and
is
Kathy in the morning.
responsible for making fake newspapers that were distributed all over Illinois. Like, it looks like a community newspaper, but it was all like Breitbart put in print. And he would send out these pink slime newspapers saying, like, let us tell you why the Democrats are horrible. And every headline was skewed. And if you don't know any better, you would think, oh, it's a local newspaper with my community's name on it.
Just like Jesus wanted you to do is fool a bunch of uneducated central Illinoisians.
That's the guy. The woman was a news reporter for the local NBC affiliate several years ago who got fired after she showed up at a subjects of a story. There was a guy who was accused of like murdering his wife and she wanted the story. And then a rival news organization got video of her at the dude's house in a bikini.
What?
And it's like her argument is, I'm trying to cozy up to this dude and he invited my kids and I over, and so I went there because I want to have a good relationship with this dude so I can do the reporting.
Is she gonna fuck him?
This is the insinuation, she argued, that they were trying to accuse her of doing these things, and she's like, I didn't do any of those things.
I just showed up at somebody's house in a bikini.
We were going to go to the pool anyway, but then they invited us to go to his. Anyway, this is 10 years ago, more than that. It's like 2007 or something. And then the rival news organization is like, oh, no, girl, we caught you, and we're going to air this on our thing. So she gets fired.
Yeah.
Then she turns to right-wing media because they'll forgive everybody for anything.
Yeah, especially
and so
she's hot.
now she's a right-wing person. I was going to say pundit. I'm like, she doesn't offer any punditry. But both of these people who now co-host this show on right-wing radio, they were making fun of Tim Walz's son as well for the same reasons. Not only did, I don't know what happened to the dude, but it turns out none of this is surprising on right-wing radio.
No.
I found this out for the first time this week. Turns out the lady is a public high school volleyball coach
No.
in the Chicago public schools. And after
that's a twisteroo.
And like, whatever, she said dumb things as a conservative radio host. But when you're making fun of this kid with developmental disabilities, now all the parents in the community are like, you're working with kids. We don't want you working with kids.
Yeah.
And they organized, they wrote letters to the administration, and within like 24 hours of them getting their shit together and making their case, she resigned, or the school fired her. You named which one. She basically resigned as their high school volleyball coach, which it's like, if you're making fun of kids who didn't do anything, you're making fun of them. Why?
Yeah.
Because they showed emotion at their dad's vice presidential acceptance speech.
I saw a tweet that was like something to the effect of like the kid, I don't even know the kid's name. The kid is 12. Tim Walz would have been more than 40 when he had this kid. You can tell he came from a bad egg. Like literally just like because Tim Walz was over 40 when he fathered this kid, his like expired sperm or what, which is like
that's how it works,
fucking
right?
cuckoo bananas crazy pants because 40 is not that old.
Didn't like De Niro just have a baby at like 97?
Yeah, like
Whatever,
all of those guys are fucking.
Right. So anyway, I was happy to see the backlash. As someone
Fucking
who does
assholes.
commentary about politics and works at a public school,
Yeah.
I'm like, I know where she's coming from. The difference is I'm not spending my time making fun of kids with developmental or intellectual disabilities like she is. I can keep the boundary. And I have to assume that for the past few years she was coaching the volleyball team, I have to assume she probably kept her distance
Right.
between her personal views and her professional job
We
there.
hope.
We would hope. And I have no reason to think otherwise. But if that's what you're doing during your day job, I get why parents would be upset about that.
I mean, it's so far beyond the pale
So much.
to make fun of a candidate's kid, period. To make fun of that candidate's kid for having emotions, period.
And even if he didn't have
And
any...
even if he didn't have any
anything.
disabilities, you're just mocking a kid for being excited about
And
his
that's
dad.
their excuse. Their excuse was, I didn't know he had any sort of intellectual disability. Well, what if he didn't? Why are you making
why-
fun of that anyway?
Monsters. Absolute monsters. Just
And
so
if you're
irredeemable.
voting for Republicans, those are the people you're voting for. And then some of these people are like, well, I'm a Christian, so I'm a good person. It's like,
so I can do a bad thing and God will forgive me.
anyway, I'll stop there for now.
Oh, is that it?
What are we talking about in bonus?
I saw a couple movies over the weekend that I want to talk about. One's called Blink Twice. One is called Strange Darling. Yeah, I don't know. I had a shitty week. My favorite horse at the barn had to be put down. So I've been crying about that for a week. But I won't talk about them in the bonus because I'm still very sad about it. I do want to talk about how much this weather fucking sucks. I worked a 9-hour shift yesterday outside.
It's very hot.
Fly bites. The flies are like just regular house flies, bit me through my gloves.
Jeez.
It's been a really bad week. But I'll probably just mostly talk about those
Happy movies.
because they're not happy movies. They're both
okay.
horror movies.
Got it. All right. We'll see you next week. Go to patreon.com/friendlyatheistpodcast to support the show. And whatever, leave your reviews. There's a Facebook and
reviews.
Discord page.
Vamp, I'm going to do a review.
Yes, right. You can join the Discord. You can go to Facebook. We have awesome
You can
discussions.
play that bingo game that somebody made up, which is very funny.
That is very
All right.
true. Yes. I'm
Nope,
shutting
it's-
this off in 2 seconds.
No, well, too bad because there's nothing new to
Excellent.
report.
Leave some reviews. We'll see you next week.
Bye.